If you would like to support the podcast, you can click the Buy Us a Coffee link on our show notes or on our website. Your support helps us keep the podcast going, and we appreciate each of our listeners so much.
You can also rate and review us on Apple and Spotify, follow us on social media, and don't forget to tell your friends and family about us. I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is
Hard Times and True Crimes.
Natalie Wood was a golden girl in Hollywood. Acting in bits since the age of 4, she got her big break in show business at the age of 8, co-starring in Miracle on 34th Street. From there, her stardom grew and she continually made hit after hit, starring in classics like Rebel Without a Cause, West Side Story, Splendor in the Grass, Love with a Proper Stranger, and Gypsy. By the mid-1960s, she was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, right up there with Audrey Hepburn and Elizabeth Taylor, scoring 3 Oscar nominations by the age of 25, and over the years she was also nominated for numerous Golden Globe Awards and won several. And that's an impressive resume. While she was oftentimes criticized for her acting, the industry knew her worth. Director Sidney Pollack once said about her, when she was right for the part, there was no one better. And then, just like that, the shining star was snuffed out, way too soon, during a Thanksgiving weekend that ended in tragedy. Stunned by the 43-year-old's sudden death, the media resurrected this now famous quote by Natalie. "I've always been terrified, still am, of water, dark water, sea water."
Born in July 1938, Natalie Zakharenko was born to Russian parents in San Francisco. Her younger sister, Svetlana, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Svetlana?
Okay.
Was born 8 years later. Because their mother had been told by a fortune teller that she would have a daughter who was beautiful and famous, she was driven to get her young daughters into show business. And throughout their lives, she coached them and pushed them into acting, teaching them not to complain so they wouldn't lose parts and to never be seen without their makeup. After Natalie got her big break in Miracle on 34th Street, it led to other film parts. At some point during her child acting career, RKO executives changed her last name to the stage name Wood so that she would be better received by English-speaking audiences.
So did she speak English?
She did.
Okay. Because, yeah, I remember Miracle.
She was raised here.
Oh, that's right. Okay, yeah.
But her mother was from Russia.
Okay.
Her younger sister, say it again.
Slavana?
I think.
Okay.
Thankfully, she changed her name too to Lana. So after this, it'll be easier to say. Okay. She would also come to the same stage name as Wood.
Okay.
Becoming Lana Wood.
All right.
Whew, glad we got that out of the way. She stated that her mother wanted to capitalize on the name in order to get more acting parts for herself, basically riding on the coattails of her older sister's growing fame. And actually, the sister, Lana Wood, went on to become one of the Bond girls in Diamonds Are Forever.
Mm.
When Natalie secured the co-starring role alongside James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause at age 16, her transition from child actress to a more adult roles was not complete, but it was definitely well on its way.
I'm sure.
And that film earned her a Best Supporting Actress nomination. Once her mother set her up with a meeting with a leading man in Hollywood by the name of Kirk Douglas. Do you know who he is?
No.
Well, that's Michael Douglas's father.
Oh.
She took Natalie to meet him at the Chateau Marmont Hotel in L.A., where Natalie was ushered into his room while her mother and sister waited in the car. Years later, Natalie confided to her sister that she had been sexually assaulted at that meeting by the actor. It affected her deeply for the rest of her life.
I'm sure it did.
Yeah. And it makes me so disappointed in him. He was a great actor, but apparently not a great person.
Yeah.
The year after Kirk Douglas died, which he lived to be pretty old, Lana did actually come out and name him as the man who had assaulted her sister all those years ago. And friends of Natalie's backed up that claim. In 1957, at the age of 19, Natalie married actor Robert Wagner, a stage, screen, and television actor.
Okay. I just talked about him in a previous episode.
I was going to ask you, do you remember? Because wasn't he like in your Parker Home episode?
Yep. He was one of their saints.
Oh, that's weird.
In their made-up religion.
Well, then it's very interesting that we're doing this episode now. That marriage ended in 1962, according to the tabloids, because of a relationship that Natalie had begun with her co-star at the time, Warren Beatty.
Okay.
Yeah. However, in a book written by her sister Lana years later, Natalie took the blame, but she alleges it was actually Robert Wagner's infidelity that ended the marriage, not Natalie's.
Oh.
And that ended when Natalie caught him in a tryst with his butler at their home.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Natalie had several other notable relationships until she married again in 1969. This marriage produced a daughter named Natasha in 1970. I love that name. And then ended just a short time later in 1972. It was during this time of separation from her husband that she rekindled her romance with Robert Wagner, her first husband. Her daughter Natasha has produced a documentary for HBO about Natalie, and in it, she states that Robert Wagner was the love of Natalie's life.
Oh.
Yeah, and that wasn't her father. But,
okay.
Yeah. Within months of that reconciliation, they married for the second time, and they went on to have a daughter together named Courtney, and Robert had a daughter named Katie from a previous relationship as well. So together they had this blended family of the three girls, one each from a previous relationship, and then one together. Things seemed to be clicking along for Hollywood's golden couple. They both had steady careers, and they spent family time together, many weekends on their yacht, Splendor, on Catalina Island. It was while Natalie was finishing up filming on the movie Brainstorm, co-starring Christopher Walken, and preparing to bring the character of Anastasia to the stage, that tragedy struck. It seemed that her career was picking back up, and she had everything ahead of her. Then, during a Thanksgiving weekend getaway, Natalie went missing. She had invited several friends out on their yacht for the holiday, but most had declined due to the miserable, dreary weather that weekend. Her co-star, Christopher Walken, was the only one who agreed to come. Do you know who he is?
No.
I'm going to tell you, and then you're going to laugh.
Okay.
Have you seen the SNL skit, More Cowbell?
No.
You don't know that skit?
I probably do.
More Cowbell. When we get done with this, you got to watch it on YouTube. It's hilarious.
Okay.
Anyway, it's got Will Ferrell.
Yes.
And then Christopher Walken.
Uh-huh.
And it is hilarious. And it's very well known and referenced a lot. More Cowbell. So, okay. But I'm sure a lot of our listeners will know. So Walken's wife, her name is Georgianne, she also had a bit part in the movie. And so there's no info on why she was not with him on that weekend trip. But nonetheless, on November 28th, a party of four consisting of Robert Wagner, who was called RJ by those closest to him, Natalie, Christopher Walken, and the ship's skipper, Dennis DeVerne, they boarded the Splendor and sailed out to Santa Catalina Island off of the coast of California. That evening, they went to dinner on the island, where they all had several drinks throughout the dinner. In fact, they had been drinking so much that the restaurant manager contacted Harbor Patrol and asked him to make sure they made it back to the yacht safely. He was concerned about their ability to get the dinghy back with all of them being under the influence.
Okay.
So their ship, it's at sea or out in the bay or whatever, the harbor.
And they took a little
dinghy into the island.
And it was not it wasn't great weather.
It was not great weather.
Okay.
Here is where the story has several different versions.
Okay.
At the time this happened, the papers were reporting this version of events. Around 11 p.m., RJ went to his stateroom to join Natalie, who had already turned in. When he could not locate her in the room, he went and informed the captain or the skipper, Deverne, and Walken that she was missing, and they all began to search for her. RJ noticed that the dinghy was also missing off the boat. RJ stated that Natalie often took the dinghy out alone, so he was not alarmed by this at the time. After some time, when she had not returned, he then took his small cruiser out to search for her. When he still was not able to find her, he then contacted Harbor Patrol to aid in the search. That was around 1:30 a.m., so now it's like November 29th.
Right. Who would go out by themselves in a dinghy in the middle of the night?
That's what you and everybody else wanted to know at that time.
I don't care how drunk I was.
Exactly. Especially if you were afraid of water.
Mm-hmm.
Lifeguards were also dispatched to help search, and they were joined by the Baywatch Isthmus patrol boat and the U.S. Coast Guard, who were contacted around 3 a.m. Now, that's a 4-hour time lapse since she actually had gone missing. And that was what was reported by the L.A. Times on November 30th of 1981. At 6 a.m., the L.A. County Sheriff's Department was contacted about the missing woman. Eventually, at 7:45 a.m., they found the 43-year-old actress's body, fully clothed except for shoes, and lying face down just below the surface, about a mile south of the couple's yacht.
Oh.
Some newspapers reported that RJ identified the body and then returned home to inform their young daughters about their mother's death. Later reports negate that story. The captain, Dennis Deverne, he claims that he was the one who went to identify the body, while RJ was helicoptered back to the mainland. And that literally is just one inconsistency in the many details that were reported in the coming days. So I did find a lot of newspaper reports. They all had varying accounts of things.
They were probably real conflicted.
They were. And then years later, as different things, there have been a ton of books written. There are a lot of inconsistencies that we will never know the true extent of. The harbor director who removed Natalie's body from the water reported that there were no obvious external injuries according to newspaper reports. Keep that in mind.
Okay.
On November 30th, Natalie's death was ruled an accidental drowning by coroner Thomas Noguchi. He attributed her death to slipping and falling off the boat while trying to get into the dinghy. The speculation was that she was trying to leave the yacht to get away from RJ and Christopher, who had been arguing. Noguchi stated that there was no evidence of foul play. He indicated her blood alcohol level was 0.14%, and concluded that she was slightly intoxicated. He added that the scrape on her left cheek was indicative of the fall from...
I don't like this, that there were 3 men and her. Okay. And now it's saying that they were fighting and she was trying to it makes me think maybe she was trying to get away from them.
Well, that's what they were saying at the time, that she was trying to get away because they were arguing and she didn't want any part of it. But you're thinking that she was trying to get away from all 3 of them?
I'm saying like if they were like pursuing her.
Well, one is her husband.
Yeah.
One is her co-worker. And one is a longtime friend.
Yeah, but if they were drunk and if they were trying, I don't know, if they were trying to assault her in some way. I don't know. I don't know the story.
Yeah,
so.
you're speculating, but that's good. I mean, I can see I'm reading your facial expressions as I'm reading this. So keep listening.
Okay.
The coroner said that the scrape on her left cheek was indicative of the fall from the boat. He also said it would be unfair to say that drunkenness caused her to fall into the water and drown, but it could be one of the factors involved in her not being able to respond to the emergency. And this is a quote from him. "It was not a homicide. It was not a suicide. It was an accident." And he said that very early on. What do you make of that?
I don't know how he would know what it was.
I don't either.
I mean, if she would...
how does he know it wasn't suicide or homicide just based on a scrape on her cheek? I think he made some pretty big assumptions.
Yeah, he did. He made some big calls when there wasn't really enough evidence to back that up.
Yep. In the days that followed, RJ, Walken, and Deverne were all 3 questioned by officers, and they all gave statements, which for the most part matched. They all agreed about the timeline of their outing on the island, the drinking, the time that Natalie had gone to her room. They all said that RJ did not find Natalie in their stateroom and asked them to help look for her. No one had heard a scream. No one had heard a splash. Eventually, Walken and Wagner both admitted that they had an argument earlier in the evening. They said it was nothing to do with Natalie.
Oh, I wonder if they had an argument because maybe he was jealous of her and her co-star.
That was also very much speculated. That was a big, everybody, by all accounts, everybody says that there was, and I will talk about that more.
Okay.
But they said it was not a major fight.
Okay. Both of them said it wasn't.
Right.
Okay.
However, now their initial statements to the police did not even mention the argument.
Okay.
But later on, they admitted it. In the days and weeks that followed, Natalie's sister, Lana, did not feel quite right about that story. She had never gotten a full version of the story, and she wanted to hear directly from RJ what had gone down that night.
Sure, I would too.
There were many speculations about a possible suicide attempt because Natalie had actually attempted suicide once before when she was much younger after she had that split with Warren Beatty.
Okay.
There was also some question about the details of that night. But RJ was ghosting Lana. Like, he is not answering her calls. He's avoiding her big time.
That's weird.
He would only speak to her through his attorney, and that was just to tie up loose ends on the estate.
Yeah, that doesn't look good.
It doesn't. Other than that, like, he is giving her the brush off. A mutual friend finally did tell her that RJ considered her to be a loose cannon.
Okay.
Yeah. It sounds to me like he just wants to shut her questions down. Well, that only tended to fuel more questions in her mind.
Sure.
Just like it's doing yours. I can read it on your face. This was her sister, and she is determined to find out what happened to her.
And she deserved to know what happened
she
to her.
does. She needed somebody to make it make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Some of her initial misgivings were concerning the fact that Natalie was terrified of water.
Yeah.
You remember I said when her mother was young, she had gone to that fortune teller who had told her she would have a famous daughter and that she wanted to be aware of dark water.
Oh.
Well, that warning about dark water had always haunted Natalie because her mother had told her. This fortune teller said that to beware of dark water, and they were a little superstitious. You know, she was Russian, and so they just had that gypsy mentality and those fears. Natalie couldn't swim. Well, they said that she couldn't swim well. Like, the best she could do is like a dog paddle. And due to her fear of water and lack of swimming abilities, Lana just knew deep down Natalie is not going to try to leave in a dinghy by herself at night in the cold rain. Like, there's no way. She's like, that does not add up. In addition to that, Natalie was wearing her nightgown, no underwear, and a red jacket, socks, but no shoes. And she also knew Natalie would not have gone anywhere without getting dressed. That was what their mother had taught them, bringing them up in show business. She's like, no, there's no way she's going to try to leave like that.
And where would she be going?
Like, even if she's trying to get to the mainland, she's not going to go like that at night
in
by
the middle
herself.
of the night.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. After the death, Lana spent several years trying to get those answers, and she was never able to get anywhere. She had basically been shut out of Hollywood. Even her acting career dried up.
Wow.
Everywhere she turned, it seemed like RJ was blocking her. But she did refuse to give up hope of finding out what happened to Natalie.
Yeah.
Finally, one day, years later, in 1992, she gets a call from Dennis DeVerne, the ship's skipper. He had been a longtime friend of Natalie and RJ, like I said, not just their skipper. He told Lana that he had not told the authorities everything that night, that he had held back some information.
Okay.
Actually, his story changed a lot. He should have just told her I lied. He did say that it had been eating him up inside all those years, and he just had to say something to somebody. Now, he was a little bit intoxicated on that phone call, so she was listening to him, but she wasn't able to get a clear version out of him yet.
Right.
But he did continue to give her some bombshell information, which fueled her up again to try to find out what really happened. So Lana was telling some other friends about that phone call, and one of them asked her, well, what did the police report say? She hadn't even thought about the police report. She didn't even realize.
She hadn't even read it?
She didn't even realize she could get a copy of it. Okay. So one of her friends got her one. That police report, which held each man's version of what happened that night, started out with the same details, like we said. Mm-hmm. However, this is when Lana began to notice that some of those small details were just inconsistent. So this report stated that DeVerne was the one who had identified Natalie's body, not RJ, as the papers had reported early on. And Lana was shocked by that. She didn't realize it. She couldn't fathom why RJ would have left his skipper to identify the body instead of doing it himself.
Yeah.
Also, in the police report, DeVerne had revealed that the night before the accident, that Friday night, Natalie had left the yacht to stay at a hotel in Avalon. He didn't want to give further details to authorities until he talked with RJ and an attorney, is what he had said at the time. But he did reveal there were 2 rooms rented that night in Avalon. So this is the night before the incident, the first night of that weekend trip. And so Lana wondered, well, then who was with Natalie that stayed in that second room?
Right.
Another thing that caught her eye, we will come back around to it.
Okay.
Another thing that caught her eye was the Zodiac dinghy. That was their dinghy. Mm-hmm. When it was found, it had not been started, and the key was in the off position. It had drifted to the place where it was later found. After police had conducted a search of the yacht, it was noted to be in disarray. The stateroom had things scattered around. The salon had broken glass on the floor and some stuff scattered around there. Lana felt, well, that should have been looked into further, and it wasn't. Now, the salon, I didn't know this, but the salon on a yacht is kind of like, I would call it like the living room. That was like a common area where you would sit.
Gotcha.
So remember I said on that evening when they were out to dinner that the restaurant manager had asked the harbor master to make sure they made it back to the yacht safely?
Yeah.
Well, the harbor master later said that occupants of the Capricorn, that was a nearby vessel that was close to the yacht, they had reported hearing screams for help by a female around midnight.
Oh, my goodness.
And none of this had come out publicly right in the days after it happened.
That's wild.
She's finding this out years later in this police report. One of the waitresses who had been on shift when they came to the island at dinner had seen RJ and DeVerne sitting at the bar, and Natalie had arrived with Christopher in the dinghy. And she said Natalie was operating that. So I did find that was like, I thought that was a little strange, especially since she was afraid of the water.
Yeah.
I mean, she would have been in the dinghy, but I didn't know that she would know how to drive it.
Right.
Okay. Do you remember I told you Natalie had stayed on that island in the hotel the previous night and had gotten 2 rooms, and we didn't know who was in the second room? Who do you think it was?
Her co-star?
Okay, that's kind of what I was thinking too, but no, it was the skipper. It was Dennis DeVerne himself. Now, employees of the hotel said that only one of the rooms was actually slept in.
Oh, goodness.
The next morning, Natalie went to pay for her room, only to find out that she had already paid for it. Dennis was seen meeting Natalie at the marina to catch public transport back to the mainland. I was thinking, so are she and DeVerne having an affair?
Yeah.
Well, Lana didn't believe that. She's like, no, she's not having an affair with him.
Okay.
When Lana read details of RJ's second interview with police, she found that due to a disagreement about whether to move the yacht closer to the mainland, RJ himself had suggested that DeVerne take Natalie back to shore and get the rooms. He and Natalie had argued about where to put the boat.
Right.
Natalie got mad and said she was going to the mainland. And so RJ sent DeVerne with her and said, get 2 rooms and go stay with her.
Okay.
So it didn't turn out to be anything.
Right.
DeVerne actually later told Natalie's sister that he had tried to convince Natalie even then to end that trip because the arguing and the tension were just too much.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, I know this story seems very disjointed and all over the place. And it is because, again, there are just lots of different versions of what happened.
Theories.
So many different people telling things. And the timeline's just a little weird. So it's complicated right now, and I promise I'll try to wrap it up and make it a little more simple.
Okay.
Christopher Walken's second statement to the police a few days later included details of an argument that RJ and Natalie were having on the evening of the 28th. RJ was angry that Natalie was working too much, and Walken found himself in the middle of a marital spat between the two. Mm-hmm. And it was shortly after that Dennis said he noticed the dinghy was missing. And then RJ noticed that Natalie was missing. This is in his second statement to the police, not what he's telling the sister years later. They all assumed at that point, this is what he told police, that she had taken the dinghy back to the restaurant, especially after the night before when she had gone to the mainland and stayed in the hotel.
Had done that. Okay.
Walken went to bed, and this is when the rest of the search begins to take place. The next morning when DeVerne woke up is when he was told that she may have drowned. He said RJ seemed to be worried. And that was just the end of his second interview. Nothing else was asked or followed up on. So that interview mostly matched the story of the other two men. But one of the things in his interview that did not match is that he said Natalie could swim, that she just didn't like to because the water was too cold. Once they were advised the dinghy had been found, Dennis had helped in a ground search in case she had swum ashore. Lana could not believe what she was reading when she read that.
She knew that
could not be true. She's like, no, she just knew. Investigators, using a list of boats moored in the harbor, began to question potential witnesses. There was one witness in particular with an interesting story. This lady was the one on the Capricorn that I mentioned earlier, and it was about 80 feet away from the Splendor. Around midnight, she said that she had heard a woman yelling, "Someone please help me." She told her boyfriend to call the Coast Guard, but he was hesitant because he thought the woman just sounded hysterical and drunk. Okay. He kind of brushed it off. Another witness, who was moored about 85 to 90 feet away, said that around 11 or so, she heard loud rock and roll music, which she thought was coming from a cabin on shore. Mm-hmm. And her boyfriend thought he heard a male voice shout, "Shut up." And he thought that was directed to another boat that was playing loud music. So he brushed it off too. So two witnesses have heard something.
Okay.
All that was at the time of her disappearance. Okay. So I know I've kind of come up and then I've backed up. That was kind of like I'm just telling you what she read in the original police report that's now like 12 years old. Okay, 11 or 12 years old. Natalie Wood's death was closed shortly after those statements were taken from witnesses, and it remained that way for over 30 years.
I mean, was there some corruption there? Like, did they truly not have enough, or did they really believe those accounts? I mean, because you would think if they did have other witnesses saying, "No, we heard somebody scream."
Well, he was an actor in his prime. At that time, he was doing the show Heart to Heart. He had been a movie star. So he was well connected in Hollywood.
Right.
And well respected.
That's what I'm wondering.
And I don't think it was a cover-up, but I do think
they just believed him.
They believed him because he was who he was.
He was a good guy. He was
was famous.
Okay.
And so I think they took him at his word and didn't pursue it as well as they should have.
Yeah.
And that's just my opinion. And I believe it's also Lana's opinion.
Okay.
When Lana read that report, and then she compared it to what Dennis had called earlier and told her, she was astounded. And she knew, like, Dennis was her only hope to find the truth. And so she really wanted another conversation with him after reading that police report. By the time Dennis DeVerne had contacted Lana to spill his guts, RJ had given other interviews over the years about that night. His story had changed slightly. Before, he had claimed Natalie may have tried to take the dinghy to get off the boat, like she had the previous night, because they were arguing, or because RJ and Natalie were arguing. So accounts on that vary. But now his story was the dinghy had come loose and was banging against the side of the boat, so perhaps Natalie had gone to tie it back up and had slipped and fell when she did that. Well, Lana found that to be implausible as well. She said that Natalie would not have done that when she could have easily had Dennis do it for her.
Right.
Like he always did. She said the dinghy could have been retied from the deck anyway, without going out to the swim step where she supposedly slipped and fell. And she said, add that to Natalie's terror of seawater. She said she's not going to go near that swim step on a cold, rainy night to do that.
Yeah.
She said the story still does not add up. DeVerne also told Lana that Natalie did not know how to drive the Zodiac dinghy, no matter what that waitress had said she saw when Natalie came up with Walken that night. He said either Natalie was steering for a second while Christopher was actually controlling it, or the waitress was just mistaken. He maintained there was no way Natalie could have driven it. He said she didn't even know how to start it. So that, of course, contradicts one of the original news reports that was shared. So when she asked DeVerne why he had gone with Natalie to the hotel that night before, he said that after she booked the 2 rooms, she didn't want to stay alone, which was the only reason he stayed in the room with her. He said nothing happened. Nothing was going on with him and Lana. Him and Natalie. And Lana believed him. And she said that actually was also consistent with Natalie's character. She said Natalie never liked to be alone.
Okay.
So what looked like maybe a possible trail turned out to be nothing there.
Yeah.
He also said he had turned on the loud music so that the other boaters would not hear RJ and Natalie's loud argument.
Oh.
And that was consistent with what those other witnesses had told police. They had heard the loud music and they had heard screaming and arguing. So I know this story is all over the place, and trying to piece together all the conflicting stories to make a cohesive narrative was just as difficult for Lana as it is for us right now. But many people have pieced together a narrative of it. If you do a quick search on Amazon, you can find well over a dozen books written about Natalie Wood. There's one written by Lana. There's one written by Dennis DeVerne. There's one written by RJ and some of his friends, and several other investigative journalists. In addition, there have been TV specials. There's that HBO documentary that I mentioned that her daughter Natasha did. There are podcasts.
Okay.
This story has been told and retold so many different ways. But I think one of the most revealing stories was the one written by DeVerne. His story actually was the catalyst for the investigation of Natalie's death to be reopened in 2011.
Okay.
So in 2010, DeVerne's book, Goodbye Natalie, Goodbye Splendor, which he wrote with a friend and reporter named Marty Ruley, that book was released. Marty was actually the one who encouraged Dennis to speak to Lana, to give her that call. That book dropped some bombs, the main one being that now Dennis is actually accusing RJ of being responsible for Natalie's death.
Really?
Yes. He also publicly said that in television interviews. He admitted to lying to the authorities in his original account of that evening.
Wow.
He alleged that the weekend was filled with arguments. RJ felt that Natalie and Walken were flirting. So you were right to question that when you did. No one denied there was chemistry between Natalie and her co-star. People on the set had even noticed, and even Lana didn't think it was strange. She said people on sets usually do flirt with one another.
Yeah.
But RJ was jealous about this. He was angry, and he accused Walken of trying to sleep with his wife. They said that at one point, he said, "Are you trying to sleep with my wife?" And he threw a glass of liquor across the room, and it shattered. And
oh, my goodness. Okay.
So he was clearly jealous, maybe rightfully so. And so there was tension that whole weekend. Apparently at dinner that night, one of the restaurant employees did witness RJ throw that glass against the wall and shatter it. Although Walken acknowledged to authorities that he and RJ had some disagreement over the weekend, he said it was only about how much time Natalie was spending working and away from her kids. I don't think that doesn't ring true to me. Because why would RJ even be telling him, why would they argue about that?
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
Jealousy seems to me much more like a catalyst for an argument.
And it seems likely that he would lie since he had a wife.
Yes, and she wasn't there.
Right.
DeVerne said that argument continued once they arrived back at the boat, and it even escalated with shouting. He said that when Walken went to his room, that he later heard RJ and Natalie fighting loudly up on the deck, and then he heard silence. When he went to check, Natalie was nowhere to be found, and RJ said she was missing. He said RJ sent him to look for Natalie, and then he said the dinghy is gone too. Not wanting to draw attention to the situation, RJ would not allow DeVerne to use the boat's floodlights or call for help. In fact, no call was made until 1:30 a.m.
That's very suspicious.
And that was an hour and a half later after she went missing.
Mm-mm.
That is very suspicious.
Yeah.
Here is a direct quote from DeVerne. "We didn't take any steps to see if we could locate her. I think it was a matter of, we're not going to look too hard. We're not going to turn on the searchlight. We're not going to notify anybody right now."
That doesn't say very much for him either.
I know, and he did say it had eaten him up all those years.
Yeah.
There are some online articles that printed Lana as saying that DeVerne had told her RJ shouted at Natalie, "Get off my boat," and that he had told DeVerne to let her stay in the water. It would teach her a lesson.
Oh, my God.
Now, that is chilling.
That is.
And I don't maintain that that's anything but hearsay.
Right.
Like I said, there is a lot of rumors and stories about the event. That's just one of them. I don't know if there's any truth to that. Sometimes things do get blown out of proportion.
Right.
And I don't know if that's one of those things or not. It was because of the new allegations by DeVerne that in 2013, the LA Sheriff's Department changed the cause of death from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. Investigators also noted that some of the bruises found on Natalie's body at the initial time of death, which were deemed superficial at the time by that coroner and consistent with falling off the boat, were now considered to be possibly sustained before she drowned. They really could not say definitively how or when she had gotten the bruises. And I think that coroner made too quick of a decision, like we said, and he didn't consider all the angles.
Did, and then he did, yeah.
Yeah. In 2018, Robert Wagner was officially named a person of interest in Wood's death for the first time. On an episode of 48 Hours, LA Sheriff's Department Lieutenant John Carina said, "As we've investigated the case over the last 6 years, I think he's more of a person of interest now. I mean, we know now that he was the last person to be with Natalie before she died." And at that point, Robert Wagner was 88 by then. Today, he is 93 years old, and no charges have ever been brought against him.
Wow.
And there's been talk in Hollywood for years about this thing. There really has not been enough evidence to charge him.
Yeah.
No one saw her fall. Nobody saw her get pushed. One person has stated that Wagner failed to look for her overboard and call for help, but it's his word against Wagner's.
Right.
Christopher Walken has not changed his story, at least publicly, so his word backs up Wagner's account, not DeVerne's. Although there are things that don't add up, there's inconsistencies, there's just no shred of evidence that things happened any certain way.
Right.
And that's really unfortunate. I mean, it would be nice if Natalie's family could have closure of that horrible death. In 2020, Natalie's daughter, with her previous husband, Natasha Gregson Wagner, produced that documentary. It was called Natalie Wood, What Remains Behind. In it, she interviews her stepfather, Robert Wagner, and he actually is the one who raised her, not her real dad. He, of course, once again, denies being involved in Natalie's death, and it should be noted here, Natasha believes his story. She supports his version of events, and many of Natalie's friends support him. But DeVerne still maintains that Wagner is responsible, and he was there that night.
Right.
Lieutenant Carina believes Natalie didn't end up in the water by slipping and falling in an accident. Lana still emphatically believes that Wagner caused Natalie's death in a jealous rage. She believes he pushed her off the boat and then refused to help her. She knows that Wagner will never be charged. He's never going to face any consequences for it. But she does hope her book will help spread awareness of the many inconsistencies in the case and put forth a possible other narrative of what could have happened. And Wagner, he maintains his innocence, but he also says that Lana's book was motivated by money because her career had dried up. Mm-hmm. He says, that she's not a credible source and that to reopen the case is just a way for her to put her name back out there and become credible again. So
So you want to know what
I want to know what you think.
Okay. So there are a couple of things. First of all, I don't think a very thorough investigation. It doesn't sound like a very thorough investigation was done, especially since there were those witnesses. But the other thing is that sometimes families, they just have a hard time with the truth, and they're angry, and they need somebody to blame. And that's just the truth. I mean, I've seen there's a situation I have in mind right now to where, I mean, the truth is very obvious, but the family just needs somebody to be angry at. And that could have been why she says, he didn't want to deal with her because he wanted to avoid the truth. But obviously he wasn't avoiding like her daughter, and he wasn't avoiding other people. So maybe she came at him.
And he also, I didn't say this, but he also didn't avoid their mother.
Okay.
He allowed their mother to live. Well, actually, Natalie had left a condo to her mother, but it was actually still in RJ's name. And he allowed her mother to live there all those years until Lana moved in with her, and then he took it away. He would not let Lana live there.
So maybe there is something, I mean, I hate to say that about her sister, but maybe she came at him in a way and he's like, this lady is dangerous, or she thinks I'm,
Possibly.
That is a possibility.
It is.
But it is interesting to me. I think really the only thing that is very, very incriminating in my opinion, because as far as the skipper goes, it's, to me, they all come back later and say a bunch of stuff.
Right.
So that doesn't hold very much weight with me.
And it took him 11 years.
It took him 11 years. So I'm always very leery of, and he wrote a book, and I'm sure he made a lot of money. So I'm leery of that, especially because he probably went to his friend, got drunk one night, was talking to his friend, trying to, I can just see him maybe embellishing a story. And then the guy's like, hey, you could, I don't know. I just that doesn't, but those witnesses that night that that was in the original police report. So that holds some weight in my opinion.
I do. I think so too.
But really, that's the only thing.
I don't think she would have gotten in that dinghy.
Yeah.
I would never, and if I was out on a boat at night, I would never try to take off by myself.
Never.
And for her to be terrified of water, I don't think she did that.
But is that only the sister that says she's terrified of water?
No.
The whole thing about her going and trying to tie it up, that makes sense to me. I'm terrified.
I don't think so because, again, she was used to just telling Dennis to do stuff like that. He was the skipper of the boat, and she was a Hollywood starlet. Wouldn't she have just said, hey, I would, like, if it was me, I would have told Tim to go do it.
Well, yeah.
Hey, go tie that boat up.
But if he was not.
But if you're arguing and you're mad.
If you're arguing, you're mad. We speed clean whenever we're mad. And if you're just wanting to, I can just, that makes sense. Or if they were, having this fight. I don't know. And the other thing, I don't think the other guy had enough motive to hold that secret. And his story has been consistent. So you don't think RJ did it? No. Really? Mm-mm. I think a lot of people do think he did. I think he did. Yeah. But this is just in my own mind what I've envisioned. Okay. If they're drunk and they're fighting. Yeah. I don't think she would have tried to leave in that dinghy. No, I don't think so. But I can see things escalating and her saying, I'm going to leave, and acting like she's going to leave, and him trying to stop her, and them going up on the boat and having an argument, and either him pushing her or them scuffling and her falling overboard. Right. I can see that happen because... you get like really angry and mad and you act in a way that you would normally do. Like, because you're angry. I can see her doing that. But again, that's all very much speculation. I do think he had something to do with it. Yeah, I don't know. You don't? To me, there's just not enough. The other actor, to me, just like I said, he just doesn't have enough. Even if I was, just say I was to have an affair, which I would not have an affair. But if I were to have an affair, okay, when you're talking about murder, that's a whole nother, that's a whole nother ball game. I would still have to, I think I would even have to probably out myself. That would really eat at you.
So Christopher Walken never really gave interviews about it. He doesn't talk about it publicly very much at all. Mm-hmm. But he was called in for another interview with police when this case was reopened.
Yeah.
And he spoke with them on the condition that it was not going to be made public, whatever he said.
Okay.
And so we don't know what was said in that interview.
Right.
We have no idea.
Right.
Now, and I will say this too. There's another rumor that RJ and Christopher were the ones having the affair. Because RJ had already been caught with his butler once before.
Now that makes sense.
And that's why he and Natalie were arguing.
Or it would have made sense to me if they were drunk. Like, honestly, this is terrible for me to even think this, but if they were drunk and they were going to try to, like, assault her.
You think so?
I mean, it would be if she was murdered.
Yeah. And that would be reason for him to cover up something.
That would be a reason for him to cover it up.
But if that was the case, it looks like DeVerne would have come out with that. DeVerne would have said that.
Yeah, what if he was in on it? There's 3 men there and 1 lady, and they're all drunk. And if they're mad at her, now that I've heard the full story, that seems more doubtful. But in the beginning, that's what I was thinking. I mean, but it's a possible scenario. It makes...
Well, and that's why the case has never been solved.
Yeah.
There are too many scenarios, and there's no way to prove any of them.
Yeah, and the only people that know the truth are those 3.
And her, and she's dead.
And she's dead,
so she can't talk, and none of their stories really match up now.
Right.
But they did match up that night, which also makes you think, well, they all agreed on it.
Yes, exactly.
So I don't know.
So I don't know. I have a hard time believing the skipper, and really his story is the most.
Yeah.
It's what's kind of blown everything.
Yeah, I kind of do believe him though.
Why?
Because I think he probably has carried that for years, and it's bothered him. Now he did write a book. And he did make money. So I have to acknowledge that could have been a motivation for him.
But that happens in every case.
Yeah.
These people come out of the woodworks like 20 years later.
I think it could have gone down that way.
It could have.
But I mean, we just don't know.
No. Obviously, there's not a ton of evidence. I mean, I don't think the guy could be convicted for it. I think what's sad is there should have been a better investigation in the beginning.
Yes.
For sure. I think that was, that was terrible. But I think what's sad is they didn't do a better investigation. And now this guy, he's possibly innocent, but he has lived under...
And he has lived under that suspicion.
For all those years. And to me, that's always sad for somebody, their character to be completely blown out of the water over something that there's really not a ton of evidence over. But at the same time, that's really kind of falls on the police. They didn't do their job.
Yeah. Yeah. They concluded all of those interviews way too soon and did not follow up on a lot of the statements that were made.
No.
I feel like they were starstruck.
Yeah. Yeah. And they, especially those witnesses like that.
Yeah,
but,
why would you
okay,
not?
But the other thing is, because I was like, but they lined up with, but again, that guy, he may have known the police reports say, I don't know the skipper to me.
You just don't believe that skipper at all.
No, he made a lot of money off of it.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I still feel like RJ did it. So that's fun. I like it when we disagree.
Yeah. I mean, and he may have.
I tell you what else kind of shades my point of view.
Okay.
Is the very first time I heard about this was when it happened, which was in the 80s. And I was a kid. I was probably 10. Okay.
Right.
And I remember it being on the news. And I remember saying, what's happening? And my mama said, he killed her.
Wow.
And my mama thought he did it. And I remember asking her later on, so you think he did it? And she's like, oh, yeah, everybody knows he did it.
Wow.
And so that probably, I'm a little biased toward because that was my first hearing about it. So I've all these years thought he did it.
Yeah. It's kind of like the Lindbergh thing, though. When you hear it, it's like, and it could be.
And do you know, after that Lindbergh episode, I had my idea of what I thought happened, and after I went back and listened to my own episode, I changed my mind.
Oh, you think he did it?
Yes.
Really?
I think he had something to do with it.
Yeah.
But that was then, this is now.
Yeah. Okay.
It's just funny that I changed my own mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Whew, those were some hard times.
They sure were.
Now, Thanksgiving is just around the corner, and if you want to make sure your shiny star doesn't get snuffed out over the Thanksgiving weekend, you make sure you're spending all your time downloading and listening to Hard Times and True Crimes. And as an added bonus, when you go to any supermarket and buy any turkey, and you tell the cashier to check out Hard Times and True Crimes, you'll get a second turkey at full regular price. Till next time, goodbye.